This is JamesimusPrime2798 here. I thought I'd just drop in and hang on a second. Sorry. Drop in and say, welcome back to another JamesimusPrime2798 Q&A video. This is Q&A video number 18. Alright, let's get down to some questions that y'all gave me. So let's start. Number one, what characters do I use as young characters? Well, for young characters, sometimes when I do flashbacks or even in the start of films where a character is a kid and then they become an adult afterwards, I just generally just use whatever characters I can think of. Like, for example, I use Herbie the Love Bug as a kid version of Lightning McQueen, Thomas as a kid version of Gordon, Percy as a kid version of Henry, Scar Lowy as a kid version of James, Sir Handel as a kid version of Thomas, Peter Sam as a kid version of Percy, Bill and Ben as Donald and Douglas as kids, Bart Simpson or Kevin McAllister being Bo Duke as a kid, Greg Heffley being Luke Duke as a kid, Matilda Wormwood being Daisy Duke as a kid, or sometimes Penny from Inspector Gadget, Penny Peterson and Sherman being Emma and Xander as kids, Ash Ketchum being Starsky as a kid, and of course Stan Marsh as a kid being himself as a kid when he was an adult in the COVID specials. So yeah, that's what I generally use as kid characters, so and so on. Alright, number two. Who is my favourite Flintstones character? It's Fred Flintstone. He is the main character throughout the series of the Flintstones and his movies. Fred works at the slate quarry in Bedrock. He's a Bronto crane operator, and his catchphrase is "Yabba dabba doo." Yeah, he works alongside his next door neighbour / best friend Barney Rubble. Yeah, sorry guys, I'm just drinking bubbly sparkling water while I'm doing this. Sorry, he works alongside Barney Rubble. They both go bowling quite regularly. They both do things sometimes and they get themselves into trouble, and they fix up the mistakes and do whatever they can and think about what's more important than the less important in life. But they snap out of the least importance and focus on the most importance. Fred lives with his wife Wilma and their daughter Pebbles, including his dog Dino, who is a young long-necked dinosaur. Yeah, and he is a good character, old Fred Flintstone, and he reminds me strongly of Homer Simpson because they're both lazy, they're both fat, and they both work quite a lot, and they both do things behind their wives' backs, and they both love going bowling. Yeah, Fred is a good character. He is voiced by Dawes Butler, Alan Reed, and Henry Corden. And he was performed by John Goodman in the first live-action movie and Mark Addy in the second live-action movie. Yeah. I've only used Fred Flintstone twice in my parodies. I've used him as President Schwarzenegger in my Flintstones movie parody and the Duke of Boxford in my Thomas and Friends parody. That's it. Alright, number three. Who is my favourite non-rail character in Thomas and Friends? It's Bertie the bus. Bertie is a red bus. He takes passengers along the road instead of by rail. And he is a close friend of Thomas's because when he was introduced, Thomas got stuck in the snow and he couldn't get out. And a bus came to rescue his passengers, and that was Bertie. And then somehow in the next episode, Bertie remembered Thomas because he was the one who got stuck in the snow and took his passengers for him, and Terrence pulled him out. And he wanted to help Thomas with his passengers today. And Thomas got jealous of the idea, and then he thinks he can go faster than Bertie. And Bertie offers him a race from Natford to Farquhar. And their drivers agreed to the race, and then Thomas and Bertie kept racing, and then Bertie had to stop at level crossings, and Thomas had to stop to let off passengers. But Thomas lost the race from Natford to Elsbridge, but he did win eventually to Farquhar Station. Everyone was there to celebrate his victory, and they gave Bertie a big welcome too. And the two keep each other very busy. But Bertie's passengers do not like being bounced like peas in the frying pan, and the Fat Controller had warned Thomas not to race at dangerous speeds. Well, Thomas and Bertie are both really good friends, and they would like to have another race, but I don't think they ever will in future because of the speed limits along the road, and of course the railway speed limits on the railway. Yeah, Bertie is a good character, and I've used Bertie once in my parodies, and that would be as Otto in my Simpsons movie parody. And I do have him confirmed as Cogman in my Transformers The Last Night parody that's coming this year. Yeah. Alright, number 4. Who is my favourite Madagascar character? It's Marty. Marty the Zebra. Marty is one of the main characters in the movies. He is Alex, Gloria, and Melman's best friend. He lives in the Central Park Zoo in New York City. One day he was celebrating his 10th birthday, and he was entertaining a lot of people alongside his friends, but when he was in his pen, he discovered the penguins were digging out from underground, and they were told Marty a secret, and they were planning to go to the wild. And Marty thought it'd be a good idea to go to the wild. And on his birthday, when he made a birthday wish and he blew out his candles, he took a bite of his cake, and they wanted to know what his wish was. Marty refused to. They begged him, and then he said, all right, and then he told them that they wished they'd go to the wild. Alex, Melman, and Gloria were shocked at the idea, and Marty wanted to know how to get there, and Melman suggested for him to take the train. And then later, as Melman went to sleep and then Gloria was going to go to bed, she told Alex to talk to Marty. And Alex spoke to Marty, but however, Marty told Alex about going to the wild that he was joking and had him worried, but actually Marty lied, and he escapes. And it was up to Alex, Gloria, and Melman to go find him. And they found him at Grand Central Station, and then all 4 animals, along with the penguins and the monkeys, they got caught. And then they were shot with tranquilizer darts, and then they had to get transferred back to Africa. And Alex blamed Marty for the incident, but it was actually Melman who suggested him to go in the first place. But he was actually being sarcastic, but Marty took the idea. And then somehow, when Alex and Marty were fighting in the boxes, they both made the boxes come off each other, and then the penguins were taking over the ship, and they turned the ship around, and then the ship turned on an angle, and then the boxes went towards the edge of the boat, and then they fell off into the ocean. And they all ended up washed up in Madagascar. Marty was thrilled with the life, and they were free. No zoo, no crowds, no fences, no nothing. But this made Alex cross because he was fed up with the idea, and he wanted to go back to New York. Yeah. But however, Marty's a good character, and I have used Marty once in my parodies. That would be as one of the giraffes in my Little Engine That Could parody. And of course, Marty is voiced by Chris Rock, the man who played Kurt McKenzie in Grown Ups. Yeah. Alright, number 5. Am I planning to do a V2 of the Michael Bay Transformers parodies? Well, to be honest, I really don't know, but it would be hard to keep redoing them over and over again because they're 3-hour movies. Well, 2.5 most likely. I know it would be a bit difficult to do because it would be hard. But if I ever do a V2 one day, which I might, I'll probably use Thomas the Tank Engine or Gordon the Big Engine as Optimus Prime, SpongeBob SquarePants as Bumblebee, Knuckles or Donkey Kong as Ironhide, Duck or Oliver as Ratchet, Dodger as Jazz, Diesel or Spencer as Megatron, Plankton as Barricade, Scar as Starscream, Monster House as Blackout, Sir Hiss as Frenzy, Shere Khan as Bone Crusher, D261 as Brawl, Jimmy Neutron as Sam Witwicky, Cindy Vortex as Michaela Baines, Hugh and Judy Neutron as Ron and Judy Witwicky, and the rest, I don't know, but we'll see. Alright, number 6. Am I going to do Thomas the Tank Engine 3, Sonic the Hedgehog 3? Yes, I am, but I'm planning to maybe do that parody either next year or the year after, in 2027, because, as you guys know, I still got a lot of parodies planned for the future, you know? Alright. Question number 7. Is James the Red Engine one of my favourite characters in Thomas? Yes, he is. He is probably my 9th favourite character, but he's not my real favourite because, as you know, Henry and Gordon are my 2 first favourites. And I know I have the same first name as James, but that's okay. James is a red 260 tender engine. If you don't know what 260 means, that means wheel configuration of the locomotive. He is number 5 on the Northwestern Railway. He is red and has black and gold stripes, and he has a number 5 painted on his tender, and he was painted black in the Railway series and The Adventure Begins. He is very vain. He thinks he's the most splendid engine on the line. And he is best friends with Gordon, Henry, and Edward. He thinks he wants to be better than Gordon, but he really wasn't, because Gordon was the grandest engine on the railway. When he was first introduced in the series, Thomas was shunting trucks in the yard and he hears an engine whistling. It was James. He was trying to stop, but he couldn't. His brake blocks were on fire and the trucks were pushing him too hard, because the reason why his brake blocks were on fire is because they were made of wood, and he came off the rails into a field. His driver and fireman didn't blame him for the accident, because it was those wooden brakes the workmen gave to him, because they always said they were no good. Thomas went to get the breakdown train and rescued him. After he was put back on the rails, Thomas buffers up behind him and takes him back to Tidmouth Sheds. The Fat Controller was pleased with him saving James and doing a good job, and gives James some proper brakes and a new coat of paint, and as for Thomas, his very own branch line all to himself. After James was repaired and repainted, he was to double-head a local train with Edward. As he was waiting for him, everyone came to admire him. James thought he was the most splendid engine, and he lets off steam, and a shower of water went on the Fat Controller's nice new top hat by mistake. When James and Edward were ready to leave, the guard blew his whistle, and James thought that they had better go, so he quickly hurries out of the station with Edward, and Edward tells him to don't push, and the coacher said don't go too fast, but James wanted to get away because he thought the Fat Controller would say something to him. When they were pulling the train, James accidentally left 2 coaches beyond the platform, and then they had to go back, and then he took care to go to the next station without doing it, and then at the next station he and Edward meet up with Thomas. And Thomas saw that James was feeling better, and he takes off with Annie and Clarabelle to run his branch line. And then James and Edward passed the field where he had his accident. The fence was mended and the cows were back again. They ended their journey safely, and then they went off to go home. James was still wondering what the Fat Controller would say about his top hat. The next morning, the Fat Controller scolds him and warns him that if he can't behave, he will take away his red coat and have him painted blue, like Thomas, Edward, and Gordon. James did not like that. He brought some coaches to the platform, and he was very rough with them. And he thinks he wants to pull coaches just like Gordon, and he thinks Gordon never has to fetch his own coaches because he's painted blue. Because Gordon doesn't really fetch his own coaches, but James does, and so does Henry at times. And then when James took off with his coaches, he went fast along the main line, and then the brake pipe on the first coach behind him had a leak in the brake pipe, and it had to be fixed with some newspaper and also a passenger's leather bootlace. And then James took Kevin never to bump coaches again. In the next episode, James was being punished, and he was sitting in the shed, and he wasn't even allowed out to push coaches or trucks in the yard. And James was worried that no one would ever see his red coat again, and when the Fat Controller came, he saw how sorry James was, and he warns James to behave himself again, and James promises hard to behave. And the Fat Controller allowed him to come out and take a goods train. And then James had to pull a slow goods train, stopping at every station. And then when James got to the top of Gordon's Hill, he thought he could get the train at the top, but some trucks broke free and went down the hill, and James thought he was doing well, but he discovered his trucks went down the hill, and he went back to get them. Edward offered to help, but James refused to, so he went on the rest of his way. When he was resting at the station, Edward pulled in. The Fat Controller was on board. James was worried that he would be cross, but no, the Fat Controller was smiling, and he was proud of James for his hard work, and he made the most troublesome trucks on the line behave. And as a reward for doing well, he deserved to keep his red coat of paint. And then one night, Gordon and Henry were teasing James in the sheds about bootlaces. But James tried to get back at Gordon and Henry, talking about when Henry got shut up in a tunnel for being afraid of the rain, and Gordon getting stuck on a hill when the trucks were holding him back, but they wouldn't listen to him. Because They were both bigger than James. Gordon brags to James that he's the only engine that can pull the Express, and he hasn't pulled Expresses for years, and he's never once lost his way, and he knows the line by instinct. Next morning, James was shunting Gordon's coaches into the station, and then Gordon takes them away, but when James was shunting some coaches to the platform for another train, Gordon comes in unexpectedly, and he tells James that he was switched off the main line and onto the loop, and he had to go all round and back again. And James teased him about instinct. But then the passengers were all at the ticketing office, and they forced them to give them back their money, but the fat controller told them to settle down, and he will promise them a new train at once. And then Gordon couldn't do it, and he asked James to do it, and James promises he would, and he backed down onto the coaches. And the fat controller tells him, "Do your best, James." And then James takes off with the coaches. And he went smoothly along the line, and he did a very good job indeed. The fat controller asked him, would he like to pull the Express sometimes, and James agrees. And then when James came by, Gordon was shunting trucks, and he was pleased to hear that he did well with those coaches, and he would like some quiet work for a change. And James said, "Good, we'll show them." And then Gordon bumps his trucks hard. And soon Gordon and James became good friends. James sometimes takes the Express to give Gordon a rest. Gordon never talks about bootlaces, and the two engines are quite agreed on the subject of trucks because they both don't like trucks. But however, Edward and Henry do trucks because they're both mixed traffic engines. Yeah, James is a good character, and I've used James a few times in my parodies. I've used him as Ramon in my Cars parodies, Donkey in my Henry Shrek parodies, Scotty in my 101 Dalmatians parodies, Comet in my Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer parody, himself, Xander, Emma and Lou's friend in my Bunked parody, Huey in my DuckTales parody, Sideswipe in my Transformers Revenge of the Fallen and Dark of the Moon parodies, himself, Bart, Lisa and Maggie's older brother in my Simpsons movie and Simpsons shorts parodies, Pleakley in my Lilo and Stitch parody, Simon in my V2 of the Wiggles Wiggly Safari, himself in my Robin Hood parody, Buttercup in my Toy Story 3 parody, himself, Shrek, Donkey, Fiona and Puss's friend in my Gordon Shrek parodies, and himself, Wilbur's friend in my Charlotte's Web parody. And I haven't thought of his yet to come yet, but I will get to that initially. Okay, number 8. What parodies do I have planned for next year? Well, the parodies I've got planned for next year are Herbie Little, Stuart Little, Cool Age 2, The Meltdown, Ice Age, The Meltdown, A Character's Life, A Bug's Life, Lightning McQueen and Friends, Thomas and Friends, Hero the Rails, Gordon the Third, Shrek the Third, Pokemon the Movie 3, JamesimusPrime2798, Mean Girls, JamesimusPrime2798, Top Gun, JamesimusPrime2798, Xander McCormick's Day Off, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Open Season, JamesimusPrime2798, Finding Sandy, Finding Dory, Hotel Transylvania, JamesimusPrime2798, Monster Blackout, Monster House, Gordon the Hall, Shrek the Halls. That's going to be my Christmas parody for next year. And Thomas Bumblebee. That's the final parody I'm going to be doing next year because it's for its 8th anniversary, and it's also for Haley Steinfeld, aka Charlie Watson's 30th birthday. So I'm going to be uploading that on the day she turns 30, because they're the parodies I've all got planned for next year. I do have 2 for their 40th anniversaries, one for Lindsay Lohan's 40th birthday, one for Gina Davis's 70th birthday, one for Adam Sandler's 60th birthday, and 2 for their 20th anniversary. And of course, one for Haley Steinfeld's 30th birthday, like I said. And the TV show parody I got planned for next year is Bo Duke, Fireman Sam. Okay, number 9. This is the second time I'll answer this question. Favourite car in the Dukes of Hazzard? It's the General Lee. The General Lee is my favourite car in the Dukes of Hazzard. It's very iconic. The car is a 1969 Dodge Charger. It's painted in a nice reddish-orange colour. It has a black and white number 01 on the door, but it's connected checkered-like. And it has a giant Confederate flag on the roof of the car with the name General Lee painted on each side, one on the driver's side and on the passenger side of the roof. In the first 5 episodes of the show, the General Lee also had cross flags on the panel behind the rear window near the trunk. It was a Confederate flag and a checkered flag. That decal was discontinued after the first 5 episodes because it was too hard to keep duplicating over and over again, because they used a total of 287 General Lees, and they had to make sure they had 13 to 14 General Lees ready to go at any time on any day. So it just wasn't practical to keep up with that sticker. The car has a Dixie horn that goes like this. Bo and Luke both own the General Lee. Bo namely drives the car, but Luke sometimes drives it as well. Daisy even drives the car sometimes as well. Even Uncle Jesse and Cooter. Well, Roscoe only drove it a couple of times and that was it. And when the General Lee got stolen or the Dukes got kidnapped, some criminals drove the car too. Yeah. Bo and Luke always climb in and out of the car windows of the General Lee, just like you see on NASCARs, because the doors are welded shut because it's a safety issue. So the boys always climb in and out of the windows. Sorry. And they do help people get into the General Lee, like they help Uncle Jesse, Roscoe, Boss Hog, or even Lulu get through the General Lee. But they don't need to help Daisy because Daisy can get in herself. Yeah. The General Lee had been racing as well in the early seasons of the show, and Bo and Luke, when they went on the NASCAR circuit, they didn't take the General Lee with them. It would be too hard to look after the car while them racing. So they left the General Lee back in Hazard with Daisy and Uncle Jesse, so Coy and Vance drove the General Lee, and it just wasn't the same without Bo and Luke. Because with Coy and Vance behind the wheel, it just didn't look right. It should be the Bo and Luke. Well, Roscoe had chased the Duke boys a few times, and he had impounded the General Lee as well, because when Bo and Luke got arrested for crimes they didn't commit. And also, the General Lee has done many stunt jumps throughout the show as well, and even tilted on 2 wheels. The General Lee appears in every single episode the Dukes has it except for one. That would be Mary Kay's baby. Bo and Luke didn't have the General Lee in that episode for 2 reasons. One reason is Mary Kay was pregnant, and Bo and Luke couldn't fit her through the windows of the General Lee with all the doors welded shut, and even that roll bar they had behind the front seats and in front of the back seat. It just would be hard to get her in through that way. So Bo and Luke just drove the blue 4-door sedan they borrowed from Cooter. And the second reason is that they were going to do a car explosion in the end of the show that was written in the script. So while McQuaid was pointing a gun at Roscoe and Enos, Bo jumps out over the car and tackles him to the ground. And Roscoe and Enos threw the cuffs on McQuaid, and then Luke lights a stick of dynamite on a bow and arrow, and he says, "Y'all better get out of the way, there's fixing to be a heck of an explosion." And then all 4 got out of the way. Luke takes a bow and arrow and shoots it behind the car in that little bit of moonshine that was on the ground, and then everyone ran away, and then the car blows up. If they had used the General Lee, they would have had to have blown up the General Lee. They're not going to do that. I'm so glad they didn't do it. So those are the 2 reasons why they didn't have the General Lee in that episode. So the blue 4-door was blown up, and it actually saved the General Lee from being destroyed, and it filled in for the General Lee throughout that episode. Because like I said about the doors being welded shut and Mary Kay being pregnant. And Bo and Luke always drove the General Lee, and they would never, ever get rid of that car because he's family. But I do remember in one episode of the Dukes of Hazzard called Goodbye General Lee, Bo and Luke were fixing the General Lee, and Luke was underneath the car checking for any damages, and the drive shaft knocked Luke out in the head and caused him to be unconscious. And then Bo calls Uncle Jesse and Daisy or Roscoe on the CB and have them to get an ambulance because Luke has been knocked out by the drive shaft on the General Lee. But Boss Hog told him they'll call one. Boss Hog and Roscoe had a plan because Boss Hog told him with Luke being unconscious, he will have him hypnotized to get rid of the General Lee and pretend it's a pile of scrap. He hires Professor Crandall to hypnotize Luke to get rid of the General Lee. Bo and Luke and Bo, Daisy, and Uncle Jesse refused to get rid of the General Lee because his family. Bo became frustrated at Luke for all the things he said about the General Lee being history, a pile of scrap, and should be replaced. But Bo said, "Half this car is mine, you know." But Luke challenges Bo in a game of bow and arrow, so he could buy his half of the car and get the car replaced. Bo and Luke ended up replacing the General Lee for a yellow car, and Luke wanted to customize it, have everything put on it, and make it General Lee II. But Bo was pissed off at Luke, pardon my French. But Roscoe had been ordered by Boss Hogg to push the General Lee towards Rainbow Canyon to be destroyed, but he leaves while the car was rolling down the hill. Cuda sees the General Lee, and then he uses his tow truck to save the General Lee and takes him back to the Duke farm. And Bo and Luke had to take it back to the dealership because they didn't want to have the car being stolen. And then when Luke snaps out of being hypnotized, he and Bo wanted to go buy the General Lee back, and then they didn't have any money, so Uncle Jesse lends them some money because he was meant to give them their allowance because Bo and Luke didn't have jobs. So they both went to buy back the General Lee, but they had a fight with some bad guys that was planning to blow up the General Lee, and then Luke goes inside the General Lee, takes the dynamite out and throws it away, and then explodes, and the General Lee was safe. And then Bo and Luke were just in time to enter the Dragonfly racing events, and then they won. And they discovered Boss Hogg was responsible for hypnotizing Luke to get rid of the General Lee. And then they brought back the General Lee, and Boss Hogg's plan failed. And after that, Bo and Luke agreed never to get rid of the General Lee, because he's family. And like Uncle Jesse said in the Dukes of Hazzard reunion, General Lee's family. And that's true. Yeah. Although they did use a lot of 69 Dodge Chargers throughout the show, but they did use 68s, but they modified them to look like 69s by using bumpers, grills, taillights, and gas caps recycled. But on the later versions of the General Lee, on the bumpers you can still see holes and weld marks from the small push bar because the General Lee upgraded to a bigger push bar. And that's what they did. So, well guys, I've used the General Lee a lot in my parodies as well. I've used him as himself as an extra in my Slinky in my Toy Story parodies, himself Peter Pan's car in my Peter Pan parodies, the Big Red Car in my Wiggles parodies, Ray Payton Jr.'s NASCAR in my Herbie Fully Loaded parody, Quagmire's car in my Family Guy parody, Boone and Milo's car in my Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer parody, himself Little John's car in my Ted parodies, himself Randy's car in my South Park parody, himself as an extra Henry and Gordon in my Thomas and Friends parody and Magic Railroad parody, himself Little John's car in my Robin Hood parody, himself Barney's car in my Flintstones parody, Coach Malloy's car in my SWAT parody, himself in my V3 of the Jungle Book, Starsky's 1975 Ford Grand Torino in my Starsky and Hutch parody, himself Brock's car in my Pokemon parody, himself Dalton's car in my Roadhouse parody, himself Ren's car in my Sleepover parody, Bumblebee's 1976 Chevrolet Camaro vehicle mode in my Transformers Age of Extinction parody, himself Bo and Luke's car in my Jesse Aloha Holidays parody, and Donkey as a horse in Gordon 2 Shrek 2. Yet to come, he'll be playing as Jupiter in my Fireman Sam parody, Postman Pat's mail van in my Postman Pat parody, The Mystery Machine in my Scooby-Doo parodies, himself Rusty's car in my Vacation parody and my Vegas Vacation parody, himself Stu's car in my Rugrats parody, the Bandits Trans Am in my Smokey and the Bandit parody, and himself Mitch's car in my Boogie Woman parody. Yeah. And guys, I do have a model of the General Lee. Hang on one second. Here it is, the 1/18 scale General Lee by Auto World. I got this thing in 2013 for a Christmas present I bought for myself after I did my Christmas shopping. I ordered this from Cooter's place in Nashville, Tennessee, and I do have another one emboxed that you've seen in my Dukes of Hazzard collection video. Yeah, I love this thing. That's why I love the General Lee. So the General Lee right there. Alright, number 10. Would I do a V3 Herbie parody? I don't know, because as you all know, I'm currently doing my V1 of Herbie, and I do have a V2 planned of Herbie. I'm keeping Lightning McQueen as Herbie in both, but if I ever do a V3 of Herbie, I'll probably use Henry the Green Engine, or Speed Buggy as Herbie, Luke Duke as Jim Douglas, Candy Dix as Carol Bennett, Amy Creevy as Diane Darcy, Cooter Davenport as Wheelie, and Fagin as Tennessee Stomats. But who knows? Alright, number 11. Will I ever do a Big Hero 6 movie? Yes. I'm planning to do that parody in 2027. And my cast of Big Hero 6, JamesmusPrime2798, is Ash Ketchum as Hiro Hamada, Herbie the Lovebug as Baymax, Dawn as Gogo Tomago, Emma Ross as Honey Lemon, Vince LaSalle as Wasabi, Bojuk as Fred, Brock as Tadashi Hamada, and Laurie Collins as Cass Hamada. And I got Pikachu, Piplup, and Baneri as themselves, Hiro and Gogo's Pokemon, and I got Luke and Daisy as themselves, Fred's cousins, and I got the General Lee as himself, Fred's car. Alright, number 12. Favourite movie in 2024. I don't have a favourite movie in 2024, to be honest, but I do not have one in favouritism, but I got a few. There's Transformers 1, The Wild Robot, the Garfield movie, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Mufasa the Lion King, South Park End of Obesity, and Woody Woodpecker Goes to Camp. They're my favourite movies of 2024. Alright, number 13. Why didn't Rosie, Mavis, and Rebecca appear in Gordon 2, Shrek 2? Well, in Henry 2, Shrek 2, sorry. Well, to be honest, guys, I didn't cast them at the time, and I forgot to do it because I didn't think to cast them in my parody for that, but if I would have brought them in, that would have been really nice, but they only appeared in the third movie of Henry the Third, Shrek the Third. But if I would have brought them in the second movie, I would have had to use Wendy Testerberger, Bebe Stevens, and Marge Simpson as themselves human Rosie, Mavis, and Rebecca, but I didn't. But that's okay. It is what it is. Alright, number 14. It's the third time I will be answering this question. Who is my favourite villain in The Simpsons? It's Sideshow Bob. He is the main villain and a recurring character in the series, in The Simpsons. He has a grudge against Krusty, and he was jealous of him because he was more popular than he was, and Sideshow Bob kept getting exploded out of the cannon and having pies thrown in his face. He decided to get revenge on Krusty by disguising himself to look like Krusty to rob the Quickie Mart. Homer was a witness, and he saw it was Krusty who robbed up Pooh at the Quickie Mart. But Krusty wasn't responsible for what happened. After he was arrested and taken to court, Bart and Lisa decided to investigate the crime and to prove that Krusty was innocent. But Bart had discovered that Sideshow Bob was the one because he heard Sideshow Bob say, "Shoes to fill." And he remembered Krusty having small feet and Sideshow Bob having long feet, and Krusty couldn't have felt pain even though he wore big floppy shoes. And then he discovered it was Sideshow Bob, and he snatches the microphone out of his hand and tells everyone that Sideshow Bob did it and he was the one who did it, and he uses a mallet to hit Sideshow Bob in the feet, and he explained that Krusty had big floppy shoes and he's got small feet, but pulled one of the shoes off and Sideshow Bob had really long feet. Chief Wiggum, Eddie, and Lou saw this on television, and they got off their butts and went down to the studio to arrest him and take him away. Krusty was free, and Homer and everyone apologized for accusing him in court. And Krusty forgave everyone, and he thanked Bart for believing in him all the time. Well, Sideshow Bob did get out of prison a few times, and he was planning to marry Bart, Lisa, and Maggie's aunt Selma, but Bart didn't like the idea. But however, in one episode, Sideshow Bob was released from prison by his younger brother Cecil, who was working as Springfield's chief hydronautical engineering. And Sideshow Bob was going to be working for Cecil. However, Cecil was a main criminal in that episode too, because he embezzled some money and he made the concrete in the dam hollow and not real, and he was planning to destroy Springfield by blowing up the dam. But Sideshow Bob saved Bart's life, and then somehow Cecil was arrested, and then Chief Wiggum decided to send Sideshow Bob back to prison for some reason. And also the two began fighting in the jail cell. In one episode of The Simpsons, I've seen Funeral for a Friend, Sideshow Bob was fingering Bart in court, and his family made a plan to help him kill Bart by faking his own death and making Bart responsible for his death. But it was a setup, so basically Sideshow Bob, Cecil, their parents, Sideshow Bob's wife and son, were all in this together as a family to kill Bart, but after Bart was saved, the Terwilligers were all sent to prison. And Sideshow Bob is voiced by Kelsey Grammer, the man who plays Frasier in Cheers and in Frasier. He also voiced Stinky Pete in Toy Story 2, and he plays Harold Attinger in Transformers Age of Extinction. And while he was voicing Sideshow Bob in The Simpsons, two of his Frasier co-stars, David Hyde Pierce and John Mahoney, also voiced Cecil and his father, Dr. Robert Terwilliger Sr. So all three Terwilligers were voiced by the three Crane men, Frasier, Niles, and Martin Crane. Sometimes I'd wish Sideshow Bob's wife, Francisca, was voiced by Perry Gilpin, aka Ros Doyle from Frasier. And if Cecil had a wife, she could have been voiced by Jane Leeves, aka Daphne from Frasier. It would have been a good combination, but that didn't happen. Jane Leeves did voice in The Simpsons, but his grandpa's old love interest from England called Edwina. So that's what The Simpsons and Frasier have in common. Yeah, and guys, I've used Sideshow Bob a lot in my parodies as well. I've used him as one of the pirates in Bowduke Peter Pan, Trip Murphy in my Herbie Fully Loaded parody, Gaston in my Beauty and the Beast parody, Riker in my Dukes of Hazzard parody, Reunion, Jackson Storm in my Cars 3 parody, Dirty Dawson in my 101 Dalmatians parodies, Captain of the Knights in Henry Shrek, Saddam Hussein in my South Park Bigger and Longer and Uncut parody, Donnie in my Ted parodies, Reese Feldman in my Starsky and Hutch parody, Diesel 10 in my V3 of Thomas and the Magic Railroad, Harold Attinger in my Transformers Age of Extinction parody, and Gary Ketchum in my Roadhouse parody. Yet to come, he will be playing as Ben Ravencroft in my Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost parody, Big Rock in my Flintstones Holly Rockabye Baby parody, Frank Bean in my Fantastic Mr. Fox parody, Lucius Malfoy in my Harry Potter parodies, Hopper in my Bugs Life parody, and Rip Holland in my Country Bears parody. I do like Sideshow Bob. I also like Mr. Burns as well. He's my second favourite villain. He is the main antagonist in The Simpsons. He is Homer's boss. He is rich, he's greedy, he's selfish, and he's nearly 100 years old. And his catchphrase is, excellent. He always relies on his assistant Smithers, because he always calls him by his surname, Smithers. And when things go his way, he always says, excellent. And when he wants to get rid of people, he always says, Smithers, release the hounds. He always asks Smithers who Homer is. Smithers always tells him, oh, that's Homer Simpson, sir. He's one of your boobs from Sector 7G. I've used Mr. Burns a few times in my parodies. I've used him as Mr. Galloway in my Transformers parody, Mr. Slate in my Flintstones parody, Rex in my Ted parody, Lord Farquaad in my Gordon Shrek parody, and Peter Thorndike in my Love Bug parody. Yet to come, he'll be playing as Mr. Harps in my Incredibles parody, and Mr. Weave in my Family Guy parody. Yeah, he and Sideshow Bob are both my favourite villains, and Fat Tony's number 3. Fat Tony is an Italian mafia big boss. He and his boys are the most powerful criminal organisation in Springfield. He has an underground club. He always tries to do business behind Chief Wiggum's back. Fat Tony does remind me strongly of Boss Hogg from the Dukes of Hazzard, because they're both fat, they smoke cigars, they do criminal things, and they both have big bosses, and their personalities are all mixed up. Yeah, and guys, I have used Fat Tony a few times in my parodies. I've used him as Boss Hogg in my Dukes of Hazzard parodies, Philip Sherman in my Finding Nemo parody, Cliff Vandercave in my Flintstones parody, Shep Wild in my Ted 2 parody, Jerry in my Transformers Dark of the Moon parody, Roadhouse Thug in my Sonic the Hedgehog parody, and Brad Wesley in my Roadhouse parody. And yet to come, he'll be playing as Storm Boyle in my Gordon the Third Shrek the Third parody, Fast Tony in my Ice Age 2 parody. Excuse me. And I will be reusing him as Boss Hog in my V2 of the Dukes of Hazzard movie. Yes. Alright, number 15. This is the fourth time I'm going to be answering this question. I know I've answered this 3 times, but this is number 4 I will be answering. Who is my favourite character in the Dukes of Hazzard? It's Bo Duke. Bo is really tall. He has blonde hair. In the first 2 seasons, his hair was really blonde, but it darkened from season 3 onwards. He generally drives the General Lee. He does share the car with Luke, so they take turns driving it throughout the show. And Bo does wear a long sleeve yellow shirt, but he always has his sleeves rolled up to the elbows. And he does wear a blue t-shirt underneath his yellow shirt. He wore that in the first 3 seasons, and he wore it a couple of times in the 4th season. But from the show onwards, he never wore anything underneath his yellow shirt. And he does wear blue jeans and a Western-style belt buckle too. And he is very handsome. And I don't need to go over what he's about and so on. I've done it 3 times already, but I will say this. Bo is a good character, and he is performed by John Schneider in the TV series and the 2 reunion movies. And he was performed by Sean William Scott in the Dukes of Hazzard movie and Jonathan Bennett in the Dukes of Hazzard the beginning. The 2 actors that played Bo in the movies, they looked nothing like John Schneider, because I know Sean William Scott is the voice of Crash in Ice Age, and I know Jonathan Bennett is Aaron in Mean Girls and Bud in Cheaper by the Dozen too. But that's pretty much different. Bo is a great character, and I've used Bo a lot in my parodies. I've used him as Slinky in my Toy Story parody, Peter Pan in my Peter Pan parodies, himself as an extra Tex Dinoco in my Cars parodies, Ray Payton Jr. in my Herbie Fully Loaded parody, Glenn Quagmire in my Family Guy parody, Larry Lobster in my SpongeBob SquarePants movie parody, Henry the Green Engine, himself John's cousin in my Ted parodies, himself Randy's cousin in my South Park parody, Junior in my V2 of Thomas and the Magic Railroad, Lemire as a human in Beauty and the Beast, Little John in my Robin Hood parody, Greg in my V2 of the Wiggles movie and the Wiggles Wiggly Safari parodies, Barney Rubble in my Flintstones parodies, himself Coach Francis's cousin in my SWAT parody, himself in my Jungle Book V3 parody, Ken Hutchinson in my Starsky and Hutch parody, Brock in my Pokemon parody, Birdie the Bus in my V3 of Thomas and the Magic Railroad, himself Dalton's cousin in my Roadhouse parody, Ren Corky in my Sleepover parody, Michael Kelso in my 70s Show parody, himself Jesse's cousin in my Jesse Aloha Holidays parody, himself Human Henry in my Gordon 2 Shrek 2 parody. And yet to come, he'll be playing as Brad Rooster Bradshaw in my Top Gun Maverick parody, Shaggy Rogers in my Scooby-Doo parodies, Fireman Sam, himself Fred and Nick's cousin in my Fred Claus parody, himself Walter's cousin in my Elf parody, himself Postman Pat's cousin in my Postman Pat parody, himself Grunkle Stan and Stanford's nephew in my Gravity Falls parody, himself Jimmy's older brother in my Jimmy Neutron parody, Simba in my V2 of The Lion King, the Bandit in my Smokey and the Bandit parody, Grady Hag in my Moonrunners parody, Rusty Griswold as an adult in my Vacation parody, himself Human Henry in my Hotel Transylvania 4 parody, himself Stu Pickles himself Stu's cousin in my Rugrats parody. I'm no longer using Bo as Stu. I'm going to use Luke. Yeah. I do like Bo, and I do like Luke as well. He is the main protagonist of the series. He has dark hair. As you can see, I got dark hair as well. He is slightly shorter than Bo. He is about 3 or 5 years older than Bo. I'm not sure how it is in the show, but I do know in real life Tom Walpat and John Schneider are 9 years apart from each other's age. Yeah. Luke is more mature and more responsible than Bo is. He does give good advice, and he does mean well, and he does look out for his family, and he knows what's right from wrong, and he was also in the Marines a lot. Well, he and Bo do argue sometimes and fight over nothing sometimes. Luke can be a bit pig-headed and also a bit of a smart aleck at times, because I remember in Carnival of Thrills, he was jealous because Bo was going to do that jump, and he was worried to death that Diane was only setting him up to do the jumps because one of the stunt drivers was nearly killed. Yeah, and Luke, he always wears a blue plaid or checkered long sleeve shirt throughout the show. And he did wear a denim jacket over his plaid shirt in the first 2 seasons. In season 1, and then he wore it in a few episodes of season 2. In season 2, he did wear a plain blue shirt. Yeah. He and Bo both wear jeans throughout the show and boots and belts. Luke always has a bear claw belt buckle on his brown belt, and he does drive the General Lee as well. Well, he and Bo remind me strongly of Starsky and Hutch because that's the inspiration that came to the Dukes of Hazzard, because generally Bo and Luke are supposed to be inspired by Grady and Bobby Lee Hagg from Moonrunners. Yeah. Luke is performed by Tom Wolpat in the TV show. In the movies, he was performed by Jackass star Johnny Knoxville, as well as Randy Wayne in the Dukes of Hazzard at the beginning. He and Bo appear in every single episode of the Dukes of Hazzard except for the first 18 episodes of season 5 because they got temporarily replaced by Coy and Vance because in real life John Schneider and Tom Wolpat walked off the Dukes of Hazzard in a dispute over their salaries, because a salary dispute with the producers, primarily regarding their share of merchandising and royalties from the popular show. But in episode 19, Welcome Back, Bo and Luke were back until the show ends. Coy and Vance left Hazzard County and were never to return, and they never returned again. And it was good to have the original Duke boys back. Yeah, and I have used Luke a lot of times in my parodies as well. I've used him as Slinky in my Toy Story parody, himself Peter Pan's cousin in my Peter Pan parody, Tex Dinoco in my Cars parodies, himself Maggie and Ray Jr.'s cousin / Ray Sr.'s nephew in my Herbie Fully Loaded parody, Gordon the Big Engine, John Bennett in my Ted parodies, Randy Marsh my South Park parodies, Mr. Conductor in my V2 of Thomas and the Magic Railroad, Cogsworth as a human in Beauty and the Beast, himself Little John's cousin in my Robin Hood parody, himself Greg's cousin in my V2 of the Wiggles, himself Barney's cousin in my Flintstone parodies, Coach Francis Malloy in my SWAT parodies, Moses in my Lilo and Stitch parody, himself in my V3 of the Jungle Book, David Starsky in my Starsky and Hutch parody, himself Brock's cousin in my Pokemon parody, James Dalton in my Roadhouse parody, himself Julian Wren's cousin in my Sleepover parody, himself Jesse's cousin in my Jesse Aloha Holidays parody, and Shrek as a human in Gordon 2 Shrek 2. Yet to come, he'll be playing as himself Rooster's cousin in my Top Gun Maverick parody, himself Shaggy's cousin in my Scooby-Doo parodies, himself Fireman Sam's cousin in my Fireman Sam parody, Fred Claus in my Fred Claus parody, Walter Hobbs in my Elf parody, Postman Pat in my Postman Pat parody, himself Grunkle Stan and Stanford's nephew in my Gravity Falls parody, himself Jimmy's cousin in my Jimmy Neutron parody, himself Simba's cousin in my V2 of the Lion King, himself Bandit's cousin in my Smokey and the Bandit parody, Bobby Lee Hagg in my Moonrunners parody, himself Rusty and Audrey's cousin as an adult in my Vacation parody, Stu Pickles in my Rugrats movie parodies. Yeah, I was going to use Bo, but I decided to use Luke. And Count Dracula as a human in my Hotel Transylvania 4 parody. So hey guys, that's all the questions I have for all of yous. If there's some you've missed out on, don't worry. I'll answer them in Q&A number 19 in the near future. But right now guys, I want you to subscribe to my channel, watch my YouTube parodies, watch all the vlogs I have done from 2019 onwards. And also, look forward to my upcoming YouTube parody, The Land Before Time 5, The Mysterious Island, JamesimusPrime2798. Okay guys, I want to thank you for tuning in. This has been JamesimusPrime2798. I'll talk to you later, and I am gone.